Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. My name is Todd Embley and I am your host. Today I am thrilled to welcome back Olivia Plotnick, founder at Wai Social and an expert on all things China marketing. Olivia, welcome back to the Negotiation Podcast.
It's great to be back, Todd. Long time no see.
It is, and there are lots of sounds in your backgrounds of like birds and dogs and water and sound, and you sound like you're in a bit of a hub of things. Where in the world are you, where we're recording you from today?
I am currently in Bali.
You are currently in Bali, and that is Indonesia. And why
Yes.
is everybody in Bali these days? We'll have to get into that, but that's for another episode. Okay, so when we last had you on the podcast in 2020, let's
What a
let's go
lifetime
at a
ago.
It is such a lifetime ago. I mean, you were so early on. We were both fresh on the scene, and here we are, both 4 or 5 years later. It's crazy. So we're gonna get into, first of all, I think what's changed. So at a high level, talk to us about what's changed in China's digital consumption landscape since then.
Obviously, we could do an entire hour, 2 hours on all the nuances and everything that's changed, not only in China, but in the world since 2020. I think one
Yeah.
of the things that's been very interesting to watch as I've been both in China during the pandemic and outside of China during the pandemic and over the past couple of years is how a lot of, the rest of the world has adopted many of the features that had been really popular in China for a long time. And so you kind of had this like seeping out of China's digital influence on the rest of the world. So that's been something really interesting to watch. But within China, and for the context of our conversation today, I think there are five things that I really, would want to touch on and mention. I think the first being there was a big, I don't know if shift is the right word. Um, Maybe maturity is more the right way to put it, of the live streaming industry. So live streaming, of course, existed pre-COVID. Platforms like Taobao, started in 2017. Live streaming was becoming really, really popular. And since the pandemic, live streaming really it really took off, and then it really started to mature. And what I mean by mature, you had all these different platforms start to integrate live streaming features into their platform. So WeChat introduced live streaming. You had Xiaohongshu start to introduce live streaming. You had Douyin and Kuaishou and all these different platforms brought live streaming into their capabilities. And now in 2024, what we're kind of seeing is each platform start to have its own more distinctive style of live streaming. And on Taobao and Douyin and Kuaishou, it's still very much that kind of traditional, Chinese live streaming style of like buy now, and it's super hectic, and there's a million products flying at you, and you don't even know how these hosts are talking for so long, and the information that they retain, it's really wild and crazy. And then you have Xiaohongshu, which we're going to talk about quite a bit today, which has started to embrace this really different style of live streaming, quiet live streaming, where you're really transported into a brand or the influencer's kind of universe, and they're educating you about the products, and it's much more conversational. So it's very, very different from something like a Li Jiaqi live stream where he's like screaming and there's lipstick everywhere. So that I think has been quite interesting, and we'll definitely touch on that a little bit later. That
Yeah, we
also kind
will.
of brings me to, there's been big changes in consumer behavior. And this is something that I've talked a lot about with colleagues and other people who are in China, in and out of China over the past several years, of like how, firstly, how has consumer behavior changed and what does it look like now? And those are two very difficult questions to answer for a lot of people. I think zooming out a little bit, China, we always have to remember China is a massive country. It is very diverse. There's almost many different markets within China. And I think over the past several years and since COVID, the nuances of the different regions have really been highlighted. And so when you ask people like, okay, how's China doing right now? Are people buying? Are they purchasing things? Somebody in Shanghai is going to tell you something very different than somebody, in a third, fourth tier city is going to tell you. And so you're getting all of these, very mixed reviews. But I think across the board, we can say that there is increased caution among consumers. There's a lot more price sensitivity. People are really looking, prioritizing value for money, a lot more emphasis on affordability, quality. So for foreign brands, what does this mean? This means that you really no longer can just enter the China market and rely on your country of origin to communicate that value. People are doing a lot more research before they're making a purchase decision. They are looking a lot at domestic brands as well. There's been a huge rise of domestic brands in the market that are producing pretty quality products and at a much more competitive price point, right? And they, sometimes have even better marketing and even better channels to reach something. And so this has really impacted, I think, a lot of brands. It's forced a lot of brands out of China. It's forced a lot of brands to reconsider China. And anybody thinking about China now should understand that you need to have an incredibly clear value proposition that extends far beyond, we're an American brand. And you need to have a really, really good product. We're going to talk more about Xiaohongshu and the importance of customer reviews and quality products is a little bit later. But just to kind of close out this point, I was in Shanghai the other week, and there's a lot of people out and about, walking on the streets. It seems very busy, but one of the biggest changes that I've noticed now compared to maybe 5 years ago is that I don't see a lot of people holding bags. Like people are not actually going in the stores and buying stuff. People are looking around. Maybe they're going to pop-ups. They're participating in some sort of offline activation, but they're not walking around with shopping bags. So I just think that there's a lot more caution out there. And that brings me into, my third point, which is consumer behavior around consumption is changing, and that's also changing consumers' relationships with brands. So what they're expecting of brands these days, because there are a lot more direct and diverse communication channels, and there is just so much more choice, so much more content out there. Consumers are expecting a lot more transparency, authenticity, even social responsibility for brands from brands. And I want to stop here as well because I'm saying these things in the context of consumers who are more likely in first and second tier cities. So I just mentioned a few minutes ago that China is a huge, diverse place, and I'm throwing out the word Chinese consumer very liberally here, but I want to make sure that for the listeners, I'm really, when I'm talking about, what are they expecting brands and social responsibility, transparency, like these are probably more likely more affluent consumers, first and second tier city consumers. And those are the ones, more on Xiaohongshu, which again, we'll get into a little bit later. But I think this, need and desire for relationship with brands, and how brands are meeting that, how people can express that through the brands that they're buying, has definitely changed a lot just within the past 5 years. And then, definitely worth mentioning social commerce as well. So when we talk about social media platforms in China, it's ubiquitous with e-commerce. So they're one and the same these days. Almost every single social media platform now has e-commerce capabilities. Whether or not the consumer is actually making the purchase on that particular e-commerce platform is a different thing. So let's take, for example, Xiaohongshu. You have the ability to set up an e-commerce store as a brand or an influencer. And for brands in particular, you don't see a lot of consumers actually purchase from their Xiaohongshu store. They're maybe browsing the products, checking the price, but most likely they're going to make that purchase on Tmall or something like this. Now, if you're an influencer and that's kind of one of your main channels for e-commerce, it's a little bit of a different story. But it is still for brands important or valuable to have stores on these different social media platforms, because it's all part of this very extensive and robust, I think, customer journey that Chinese consumers go through. And the last one that I wanted to mention was the rise and popularity of virtual idols. And so I was talking before about live streaming, and typically you would imagine that being done by a human. Now there's a lot of digital avatars being created by companies and even by brands as well. Obviously, there's huge advantages to that for brands in China. It's less risky. They can work all the time. You can really tailor it to your brand or build that out of how you want to. I think it still remains to be seen of how strong a relationship a digital avatar can really build with a fan base. How can they really galvanize them? It's probably quite interesting for the younger generation, like Gen Z and below, who have grown up in such a digitally immersed world. But for millennials and a little bit older, I think it's, there's still a lot of power around, human driven content and building relationships with that.
Okay, that's interesting. When you mentioned about consumers now really wanting to have, they are going to wear, let's say, a brand in order to represent who they are, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of pressure on brands to be able to do that. But that means that brands have to work hard to have a representation. Like, it's, if you're going to buy a cologne, it needs to have a great smell. If you're going to buy a product, it
Right.
needs to have a great representation to those who see it on you. So
Yeah, and
yeah, go ahead.
I think it even goes beyond, a lot of times previously you see, especially big luxury brands or brands want to enter the China market and they engage like a massive celebrity. That's not really a super effective marketing strategy anymore. Like there's not a lot of storytelling around that. That's not
No.
creating a reason for somebody to buy into this cologne just because the celebrity does anymore. And so that's why I think you see a lot of brands turning not out of just necessity to get the reach, but engaging different content creators and coming up with much more creative campaigns to actually tell more of a story around the product, instead of just we need to get this in front of as many eyeballs as we possibly can. And that creates a lot more challenges for brands, because you need to understand the Chinese consumer even more, and you need to understand the distribution channels even more than you did before.
For sure. I mean, if I'm going to buy a spring jacket, there is a massive difference between me getting a Lululemon or me getting an Arc'teryx. It just represents me in two completely different, and I know they're similar, but no,
Right,
they're
but they're
not.
very different.
They're very
Yeah, and
different.
I can picture right now, even there's a new Arc'teryx store on Nanjing Shilu, and Lululemon now has many different stores, and just the presence of those and the social media presence of that those brands have really carefully crafted over the years in China are very, very different, and the storytelling, all the thought that's gone into that, and so I think that's something super important to note.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's some underlying advice there for brands entering China is just to kind of be aware of you need to know who you are, and then you need to be able to express who you are and have other people recognize your brand and feel that similar expression, because that's why they're going to be
Yeah,
wanting to buy you.
like
Okay.
what story are you telling in China, basically?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That leads me to a quick question, though. If you're telling a story in China, will a Chinese consumer try to parallel that with the story you tell outside of China and find it disingenuous if the two stories are not congruent?
this is really where you have to have an amazing brand manager. You have to have an
Hmm.
amazing team in China, right? Because for sure, and especially again, want to go back to the point I made about, we are talking about consumers in first and second tier cities here who probably, do have access to Western social media platforms. And so they do, have some idea for how that brand is portrayed both outside of China and in China. And so the the brand values need to be the same. It can't be something completely different. But the trick is, and that's why, localization is, incredibly important, is because how do you localize that story for China? How do you take elements of Chinese culture? How do you take elements of what, Chinese are experiencing right now and looking for right now, and weave that into your brand story and communicate that in again a way that is very authentic and very genuine, and not just kind of this top level, like, oh, we put Asian faces in the campaign, or we used a bunch of red colors, or we put a bunch of dragons on it. It has to be so much more nuanced than that these days.
Okay, agreed. Yes, thank you very much. Let's jump into the aforementioned. And by the way, we'll probably have to put that disclaimer in the show notes now. It's become that important to make sure that everybody knows we're only talking about affluent first and second tier city shoppers
Yeah,
for now, for our
for now, yeah.
purposes of
This episode,
explanation.
yeah,
This
yeah.
episode, exactly. Xiaohongshu, Little Red Book. Uh, Western listeners probably understand the TikTok better, right? The TikTok original, the OG of TikTok, Douyin. And even though it doesn't have the same kind of shopping functionality, at least not yet, because it's ever changing, but Xiaohongshu has no clear comparison for the Western palette. So let me ask you first, basically, what is Xiaohongshu? And please just describe its features, interface, user base, how it works.
I would say that Xiaohongshu is kind of a combination between Pinterest, Instagram, um, you know, Google search almost. It's kind of pulling in different elements from very popular Western social media platforms. But you're right. There's no kind of copy paste version. Traditionally, it launched as a sharing platform for overseas products. And now we can say it's pretty much a comprehensive lifestyle platform that's really pivotal in the consumer decision making process. So, launched in 2013, so it's about 11 years old at this point, and it has 300 million monthly active users. I honestly thought this number was, I thought it was closer to 400 million, but when I recently checked, it's still around 300 million monthly active users, which in the scheme of things is very low. Which, coming back to our point, is like that's why we're only talking really about a smaller subset of Chinese consumers here.
Yeah.
It skews mostly female, so it's about 70% female, 30% male on the platform, and most are born after 1995. The second kind of biggest subset of that is born after the year 2000. So, younger consumers on this platform. Mostly, and when I say mostly, I'm talking about nearly 50% of the users are from first and second tier cities. And, there's a lot what's happening on this platform. People are searching for brands, they're searching for products, they're searching for inspiration. And so the type of content that you'll find on here is a lot of images. Video is becoming more popular on the platform, both shorter but also longer video, like vlogs, things like that. And usually this image or video is accompanied by, I wouldn't say extremely long text, but a lot of the text, like a microblog almost. So there's, a lot of details and sharing that goes into both the imagery and the text on there. You can like content, you can collect it, so kind of save it to your profile if you want to go back to a certain post later. You can comment on posts. You can join closed communities, so kind of private groups where you can have discussions with the creator, things like that, and you can share posts on there. And as I said, a lot of people are using Xiaohongshu for product discovery, and kind of product verification almost. And so
Hmm.
they're reading a lot of reviews. The platform has mostly user generated content on there. And I would say that it's very visually appealing. So you have, when you open it up, you kind of have a for you page, which is content from accounts that maybe some of them you're following, but maybe some that you're not. It's the algorithm feeding you what it thinks that you'll be interested in. You can then switch to a view that's only accounts that you follow, so you can look at curated content from there. But I think what's really interesting and worth noting for people who will understand Instagram, and something that I've noticed, I I actually prefer, and I think that the content on Xiaohongshu that I am fed is much more interesting. It's much more diverse. It's much more creative than when I go onto Instagram. So if I go to Instagram discover page, or if Instagram starts feeding me posts that it thinks I'll be interested in, honestly, I'm like, eh, it's kind of weird content. It's not that great. It all kind of looks the same. Whereas when I open up Xiaohongshu, um, it's, there's fashion, there's lifestyle, there's
Yeah.
artwork. It seems to me that it's feeding me a lot more diverse range of content. And I think that also comes down to, the platform. All of these different platforms are really, they're vying for attention, right? And so they have to be very conscious about that experience that they are providing to the user. Like in China, there's so many different platforms that people could be on, whereas in the West it's like, well, there's Instagram, there's Facebook. Like the competition isn't as big, and so I feel that for the user the experience has actually gotten a little bit worse in some case. I mean, for example, on Instagram, the amount of sponsored posts that I see is crazy. The amount of ads that I see is crazy, whereas I don't feel that as much on Xiaohongshu. So I feel that the user experience is just much better.
That's amazing. And it's like you said, you were surprised to see that it hadn't grown more, that it didn't have a larger user base. I completely agree with, and Instagram is so bad for that. I think it's probably one of its unknown struggles that maybe they don't know it has. But I even just remember back to when I was younger and I was in school and I was taking my first day of microeconomics, and the teacher brought a box of chocolate bars. Had this kid come up to the front of the class, had him eat the first chocolate bar. How much did you like it out of 10? 10 out of 10, whatever. He's like 10 out of 10. That was amazing. Okay, have a second one, a third one, a fourth one. Now he's like, dude, like 2 out of 10, and I don't want to have another one. Like, it's just, there's just too much of
I'm
a good
gonna
thing.
puke.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, right. So variety is the spice of life, and maybe they've forgotten, or they were so gung ho on trying to nail
Right.
what people like and will engage with, forgetting that you just can't eat the same meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. Okay. I know that you covered some of this, so at the risk of being redundant, and I want to open it up to maybe then, do you have anything else that you might want to add to how Xiaohongshu is influencing users' lives?
So, like we said before, it's a huge part of the decision making process. So, people are going there for product reviews, recommendations, influencer endorsements, lifestyle inspiration. So, go to source for fashion, beauty trends. And there's also now a lot of educational content being posted on there. So, the niches are starting to kind of be built out on the platform, whereas a few years ago it was just so heavily beauty, fashion, travel, and lifestyle. There's a lot of health and wellness, fitness routines, recipes on there. So people are going there for that type of source. Travel and leisure. So Xiaohongshu is a big part of not only pre-trip planning. You have people, okay, I'm going to go to Italy this summer, looking up what are the coolest, and I'm going to say Instagrammable places, but we can say Xiaohongshuable places, be really beautiful to take a lot of great photos at and things like that. And so pre-planning, but also once you get to that location, it'll start feeding you content. So for example, I mentioned right now I'm in Bali. When I open up my Xiaohongshu page, I'm flooded with tons of content from people who are posting about cafes and vlogs in Bali and gyms that they're going to. So it really helps you kind of,
Eating and praying
discover
and
new
loving.
eating. Exactly. I think it's also quite monumental
Oh no,
for
just loving. Bali was
community.
just loving. I forgot.
Just loving. I mean, there's a lot of eating going on too. I think Xiaohongshu is also quite important in a community building aspect. WeChat is such a closed, a walled garden, as we call it. It's also a channel, I think, for a different type of audiences on there now. A little bit older, and I think for Xiaohongshu, communities are really. I mentioned you can have private groups and you can engage with your users in a lot better and more open way. You can facilitate, offline meetups and things like that. So it's been pretty influential for brands as well. And I think just the convenience and accessibility of it. So for creators, influencers particularly, you can have your e-commerce store on the app, and you can drive people, you can endorse certain products or you can be selling your own products. And so I think it starts to build up creators in a way that the other platforms maybe haven't before. So I think those are, kind of the top ways that it's really impacting or making a difference in certain parts of the journey and for certain industries.
Yeah, making it easier to monetize would certainly help attract a lot more people to use it, in my opinion. And for those of you who didn't get the Eat, Love, Pray reference, gotta watch a movie once in a while, maybe. But it was a Julia Roberts, very, very famous movie. She went to Italy to eat, and then India to pray, and then Bali to love, and that's where we're getting it from. Okay, just in case nobody got that. Let's talk about brands and Xiaohongshu. How are the brands leveraging it? And what are the tips that you might have for brands that are looking to jump on it?
Xiaohongshu is, I've listed a lot of really great things about the platform. Xiaohongshu is kind of a tricky one for brands
Okay.
because you need to let go of a few things. So first, let's talk about um, followers. It's very difficult, I think, for brands to get followers
Yeah.
on Xiaohongshu because it's more about discovery and entertainment and research. And so when I mentioned that even when you directly open up the app, you're getting pushed first to this kind of discover page where you're not necessarily first being fed content that you've chosen to follow. And so as a user, it's less like, you might see a post that is from a brand that's really great, entertaining, aligns, but it's just one of many that you're scrolling through, and you're not taking the extra step to actually go to that brand page and follow that particular brand. And so I think the expectation for brands has to be adjusted a little bit there when you're thinking about your Xiaohongshu strategy and like what is going to be the most important things to measure. And this kind of ties into a larger point that I've been thinking a lot about lately with social media. And I heard this from Casey Newton from Platformer, which is a tech platform. And he said there's a very big difference between traffic and audience. And I think this really applies to Xiaohongshu. On Xiaohongshu, it's a traffic platform, but you have to be very conscious about turning that traffic into an audience. So I mentioned previously that you can actually build out really good community on Xiaohongshu, and there's a lot of creators who do this. But it's about how are you consistently showing up on the platform and creating content that has a very specific messaging that is able to take that traffic and take all those metrics and then take them into your audience. And an audience is someone that will follow you regardless of what platform that you are on. So they're, like your super fan, I think. So that's kind of one tangential point that I wanted to make. Secondly, brands need to be thinking about collaborating really well with influencers on the platform. So Xiaohongshu much more favors, creators and influencers. If you kind of think about success on Xiaohongshu as an image of an iceberg. And an iceberg, you only see the top of the iceberg above water, right? But there's so much ice underwater that you're unable to see. And as a brand, in order for your content to get noticed above the water, you need to be building up this huge repository of content to kind of get your brand above water. And so you're going to have to engage a lot of influencers, big and small, to be constantly creating content around your product or your service. One brand asked me a question one time is like, okay, if I have so let's say I do an offline activation, or what is the most effective call to action? Like, should I ask people to follow my account, or what should I do? And I think the most impactful or the best thing that you can get from somebody to do something on Xiaohongshu is to create content about your brand. So don't ask for a follow. Give them an opportunity to create content around your product or service and post that content and share about it and create more on Xiaohongshu. So then that starts to kind of build up your library and build up your presence on the platform. And talking about content, we've mentioned this before, that it really pushes high quality creative content. So it's not just about a really aesthetic photo. It has to do with the text that you are creating as well, how you are engaging with your followers on that. So there's much more, I think, that goes into creating high quality content. And that brings me to the final point of brands need to make sure that they're actually engaging with their audience. So if you look at creators on the platform and influencers, how they're able to do so well and build out such a community and have such high conversion rates is that they're really taking the time to engage with their audience, respond to comments, be looking at what other people are posting about your brand, responding to that, getting back to them, things like that.
Yeah. If you're an engagement, I mean, the algos love engagement, right? So, like you said, if you can get them to repost or take a picture of our shoe and then use this hashtag and the things, that's what the algos like. Like it's the old Google mantra: Google doesn't love you until everyone else loves you first, right? And so when they can see that other people are loving you, well, then they're going to jump on that and then they're going to feature and push you because they feel because they're just driven to give the people what they want, which is kind of a cool thing in a naive essence kind of way. But if you can tap into that and make the algorithms think that you're something that other people want, then they're going to push you forward. And I do if you're engaging with not just improving engagement with you, but you're engaging with them and you're actually adding and improving their life, those are just great opportunities to really ingrain your brand into that particular customer, right? Like we all know about the what was Superhost when you were going to work at a restaurant or you were going to serve, and they said people will 1 out of 10 people will talk about a great experience they had at the restaurant, but 10 out of 10 people will tell people about a bad experience, kind of thing.
Right.
And so you got to really kind of help them have those great experiences to talk about. Speaking of influencers, we're going to talk about KOLs and KOCs. If my memory serves, KOLs are key opinion leaders and KOCs are key opinion consumers. Could they be key opinion creators? But Tell
It's
us,
gonna, yeah.
what's the difference between a KOL and a KOC, especially in today's world?
A KOL, as you said, a key opinion leader. And I think maybe the easiest comparison for somebody for the West to think about is a big influencer, a really big creator with millions and millions of followers, or maybe they're a celebrity. They are regarded as an expert or an authority in a specific field. They're typically very well known in fashion, beauty, fitness, something like this. Now, a key opinion customer is more of a micro influencer. So they have built out influence and trust within their circle. They typically have a smaller following, but this following is, we can say, usually more engaged. They usually have a lot more trust built up with that influencer. And I want to actually add a third term into this discussion, which is a KOS, key opinion sales. And so now we're seeing a lot of salespeople or branch managers opening an account on Xiaohongshu. They have, really deep knowledge about the product or service, and they are creating content around that to drive people to, a store or a branch. They're talking about, new product releases, or they're sharing discounts, things like this. And so, yeah, if you hear KOL, KOC, KOS, those are kind of three, I would say, currently of the different groups of influential parties on Xiaohongshu.
What about
It's
the
very
KOO?
important. KOO,
Yeah, the key opinion, Olivia.
cool, too cool.
She's so cool. Okay, continue.
But I think it's very important. You're not just only going to work with KOLs. You're not just only going to work with KOS or KO. I'm getting them confused now.
I
There's too many
know.
things.
I've thrown you.
KOCs. There's going to be a mixture. And so typically, we tell brands you're going to allocate your budget. Obviously, the KOLs are going to be the most expensive because they have the biggest audience, the biggest reach. But you don't want to blow all of your budget on them because they're not going to actually be able to get you conversions. And, every brand in the end just wants to make more sales, right? And so you're going to allocate a part of your budget to working with a few big influencers, a few big KOLs. You're going to allocate really the majority of your budget to working with KOCs, so key opinion customers, which have that smaller following. Now, remember a few minutes ago when I told you about Xiaohongshu is about generating all of this, user generated content on the platform. So you want as much of that to be built up as possible. And when you engage, hundreds of KOCs, they're putting out hundreds of posts about your brand. And those hundreds of posts, built up over time, are getting into more and more people's feeds, right? And so your brand is then becoming visible to some and visible from smaller creators, which again are typically building up a little bit more trust. So it's really important, I think, to understand what your allocation is going to be between those two or three kind of sets of pushers of your content out there. Xiaohongshu also has paid options, so you can do targeting within the platform as well. That's typically used by larger brands, but I would say for brands who are just entering the China market or really starting to grow their presence, engaging KOCs is a very common, very tried and tested way of doing that. Now, again, really coming back to who you engage needs to be relevant to your brand. I think consumers also have a much higher BS tolerance, and so if it just completely, doesn't match if your brand doesn't match with what the creator is already putting out there, it's going to be pretty weird. So doing your due diligence and understanding this creator, what their messaging is, who their audience is. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the same category, but it needs to be relevant for your brand, and it needs to align with your brand values as well.
All right. So they have good BS radar.
Yes.
That's what you're saying. Yeah. So low tolerance for BS. Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. 100%. Okay. I think there's, a key opinion leader is great to get everybody to think your brand is good, and a key opinion consumer is great to get people to buy because they think that it's good for them, good
Sure. Yeah,
on
like
them,
just
because being
furthering down the
relatable.
funnel.
Yeah. Now I know this brand is probably good. It's probably worth the spend. It's probably a good quality product, such and such and such. But then I see somebody that I relate to, and I
Right.
can, hey, that person's kind of me. And I see them wearing something, and that actually looks kind of good on them. So then it's probably going to look good on me. So I will buy. But
Exactly.
yes, it's an important conversion piece, like you said, in that sales funnel. Let's talk a little bit about categories to finish off the Xiaohongshu.
Sure.
What categories are particularly suited to do well on Xiaohongshu?
Beauty and skincare is huge on the platform. Remember when we talked about the demographics, 70%
Mm-hmm.
female, 30%
Mm-hmm.
male, and the platform is really centered around, lifestyle inspiration. So that
Okay.
extends to beauty and skincare category, fashion, health and wellness, so fitness routines, healthy recipes, things like this, travel, you have home and lifestyle, like what are things, how should I design my apartment or office space, things like that, and technology and gadgets as well. So I am seeing content. It's a little bit more niche and not as popular yet, but I do see a lot of content popping up around, technology, different apps that you can use. I have a lot of content on there around like GPT and OpenAI and or study tools, like note taking apps. What are people using for that? A lot of comparing different iPad products. So there is starting to be these different niches on the platform, but in general, this is if you are anywhere in the beauty, wellness, fashion, lifestyle, travel, this is definitely a platform that you're going to want to look into.
Okay. Campaigns that worked well. Let's give brands an idea, although it would be much, much different for them for sure. But can you point to a couple of campaigns that you really appreciate, or one campaign that you really appreciate that you've seen has been very successful for a brand or brands using Xiaohongshu?
This is a very famous one, and it was from last year, so it's a little bit outdated now, but I think it really highlights kind of the power of Xiaohongshu. So you had a very famous collaboration with Hey Tea, which is a milk tea, bubble tea brand in China. It's a domestic Chinese brand, and Fendi.
Okay.
And so they released a collaboration where you could get a Hey Tea in like a Fendi cup. And so, again, this comes back to that idea of how do you create a vehicle for users to then create their own content about your brand and share it on the platform. And this is, I think, a prime example of that because they were, you could go to Hey Tea and get your, milk tea, this special drink, and it would come in a Fendi labeled cup, which is, obviously very cool, very trendy, very hip. And so Xiaohongshu was just flooded with, yellow Fendi Hey Tea cups on there. And that campaign was very, very successful. Another really along those similar lines, a really cool one that I saw at the beginning of this year was Gentle Monster released a new glasses collection, and it was like a jelly collection. And so they sent out to a lot of the influencers the glasses in these like almost 90s looking candy, like jelly bean candy bags. And it was just very fun. There's a lot of nostalgia there, opening them, taking them out of the package is very colorful. It's easy to be creative around that, right? It's enticing to share around that. And so I think some of the most successful campaigns from brands are where you can have users create content with your product or with something that you give along together with your product and then post that on there because Xiaohongshu engine is driven by user generated content and getting as much of that for your brand as possible out there.
Nice. Okay. Let's talk about some of the notable lifestyle trends that may we say are being perpetuated on Xiaohongshu.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe talk to us about one or two of those, and I'll throw you an example of what I'm talking about, such as City Walk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, City Walk became quite popular last year. Now, remember at the beginning of our conversation when we were talking about changes in consumer behavior, and people are just a lot more cautious with how they're spending money, the activities that they're doing. They still want to, go out and be social. There's this, need after the pandemic to go out and do stuff. And so City Walk really emerged as this trend to go to different places around the city and go out and do things without spending a lot of money. And so on Xiaohongshu, as we discussed as well, it used to be a platform, or it's still a very popular platform for travel. And so people share like travel itineraries on there. And people were creating these really beautiful maps of, for example, Shanghai, where you have all the different streets and it would tell you, okay, you can go to this location and there's a really cool building. Shanghai has so many beautiful streets, really beautiful buildings, really beautiful parks, things like this. And so they were creating different routes for people to go. And you could, spend your Saturday or Sunday going on this route, going to different places, and you're not having to sit in a restaurant or, go to the movies, or you're not having to spend all of this money. And this has been so crazy to see because in Shanghai, there's the French concession area, or the area around Anfu. You go there on the weekend and there's just a sea of people, and they're not actually going into the different shops, but they're taking photos in front of really famous buildings. And I guarantee you that's all thanks to this trend like City Walk. That's all being then posted onto Xiaohongshu. And I went actually, there was a mass of people in front of this certain building off of Wai Lu. Most people will recognize it. It kind of looks like the Flatiron Building from New York. And there's a little cafe right across the street of it. And I mean, you can barely even enter the cafe because there are so many people, and they're just all taking photos outside, but there's like nobody inside this cafe. And again, that's thanks to these Xiaohongshu trends like City Walk, where people are just trying to, go around and take pictures in front of different places and then share their content on Xiaohongshu. And you did see a lot of brands actually jump into this trend. And so I remember seeing, I think it was Lancome. So Lancome took, a lot of spots around the French concession, which was a very popular area to walk around. And they decked out, buildings with, Lancome branding, and you could try, I think it was a foundation that they were promoting, or they had little camping chairs out on the side of a corner. So trying to get involved into that trend somehow, which again is how do you create, or how do you participate in a trend that allows people to create content with your brand and then share it on the platform.
Yeah, it's interesting, and not everything is as it seems. I've seen that recently some content creators trying to dispel the myth of like Santorini, Greece, of like the white, and the blue roofs, I think, and the white buildings, and there's this epic spots, and it's like a 2 hour long line behind the scenes, all of content creators that have all come to Santorini, Greece to take that one video or that one epic picture out on this one kind of, and then they show you like what it's actually like in Santorini,
Instagram
and
versus reality.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's
Which
hilarious,
sucks for businesses because, you're sitting there, you have a prime location, but people are just going there to take that one photo. And so I think yeah, as a business, you're probably like, how do I become, how do I actually entice people into the store after they take the photo? That's kind of a huge, I would imagine, annoying thing
Yeah.
for businesses to have to deal with.
Oh man,
You're getting all that traffic, but you're not able to capture it.
I, man, you get outside. You make a whole bunch of drinks and you put them on a tray
Yeah.
and then you take them out and you sell them.
Yeah.
You
Well, actually,
you know.
is one coffee shop on, again, on Fulu, and they opened like a little window store, so you don't, there's no, place that you're going in and sitting in it, and they're selling, you get a coffee, and in the coffee you're like, attached onto the side of your coffee cup is like this fluffy little bear. And I don't think the coffee is very good, but there's always a huge line. Everybody wants to get that coffee because they want to take a photo again of the coffee with the little bear on it because it's so cute. But that's a great example of a business that was able to capitalize on the traffic and the need to kind of take a photo and share something and sell their own product.
Yes, it everything must be worthy of the gram, as we
Yeah.
say over here. That's
Yeah.
it's so key. Every
Worthy of the
restaurant
book. Yeah.
worthy of the book. I love it. Okay,
Yeah.
so there's this tiny little unknown shopping day that's kind of coming up next month. It's called 618. It may or may not be usually the first then the second largest shopping day in the world. So yeah, 618 is coming up. Let's get a little bit of your prognosis and your kind of crystal ball of how things are going to go. What do you think is going to happen this year? And do you think consumers still care about these shopping festivals like 11/11, 12/12, 618?
I think there's a lot of fatigue around this, and quite evidenced that the 12/12 shopping festival was basically canceled. And so approaching 618, which is, I would say, not as big as Double 11, definitely bigger than 12/12, is kind of the highlight shopping festival of the summer. Is going to be a lot slower. I think people are going to lean into product recommendations a lot more. So searching for, again, coming back to this idea that people are a lot more obsessed with value for money and doing their research beforehand. Um, you know, Before these shopping festivals, there's a lot of activity around pre-sale mechanisms and coupons, and some years you even had users like, there was just these wild posts about how to decode the coupon system, because the coupon systems that some of these e-commerce platforms were putting out were like so intricate and so complicated. And because there's just so much fatigue around that, they've really stopped kind of doing that again. But I think there's still a strong marketing effort around the shopping festival. It's obviously still happening, but I think another one of the biggest changes will be seeing a more clear shift into the different platforms for their different specializations. So, for example, going back to JD.com for more things around, tech products, or going to Taobao for kind of daily necessities, probably Taobao and PDD for more daily necessity products. So, really kind of segmenting a little bit more than has been in the past.
Okay. All right. Amazing, Olivia. Love it. Tell us more about Wai Social. Where, how, when, maybe also why can we get more engagement and be able to digest more of the COO?
I like that. So, Wai Social has been running for 5 years now. I've been in China for almost a
Oh,
decade.
the
And
KOO. I called it COO.
KOO. I know.
Sorry.
I am the
I was
CEO.
thinking coup, and then I just
Coup.
said it COO. No, digest more of the KOO.
Kia, the key opinion, Olivia. So
That's
yeah,
right.
Wai Social, we're a boutique social media marketing agency based out of Shanghai. Been there for 5 years. We help brands with everything from their strategy to actual account management for mostly Chinese platforms to reach Chinese consumers. And we also put a lot of effort into thought leadership. So we have a bi-weekly newsletter that goes out, kind of running on different topics. So anywhere from strategy advice for brands to we'll put out a news. Kind of a series on cool campaigns that we've seen.
Hmm.
So trying to mix it up, but really trying to provide very original content, stuff that we're seeing on the ground, stuff that can be really helpful for brands. So definitely sign up for that. And then, yeah, feel free to reach out for me. LinkedIn is a great place to connect and follow for, try to post often insights on there. But I think, yeah, definitely reach out through
Yeah.
email or LinkedIn.
Yeah, and LinkedIn's great because it is one of the more capable Western platforms available and usable in China as
Yeah.
well, which is what makes it so kind of cool. I mean, they were one of the few tech platforms back in the day that actually just decided they were going to play ball and kind of rebuild themselves and let themselves be hosted and monitored and all that, and they just didn't even fight it, and that's why they're
Yeah.
it's so easy to use in China. So yeah, if you want to get more of that bi-weekly KOO newsletter, head over
Well,
to
now I have to
Wai
rebrand it.
Social.
The coup letter.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think it's amazing. And I think you're amazing. And I think all your advice and education has been amazing. So, Olivia Plotnick,
Thank you so
founder of Wai
much.
Social, thank you very, very much for being on the show once again.
Thank you, Todd.
Okay. For everybody listening to us on audio only, don't forget to head over to the WPIC YouTube channel, check out this video, and check out more shorts and more information over there. For those of you watching us on the video, don't forget to go check us out on the audio podcast version on all your favorite podcast platforms. But for me and for everybody at the negotiation team and for Olivia, the new KOO in town, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.